Hi there, and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. This year's droughts have been tough on us, but it's especially hard on wildlife. As we head into winter, it could be even rougher for the creatures that have found sanctuary in our gardens. Today, Charles Stevens from Wild Birds Unlimited explains how to give them a helping hand and enrich our own garden experience too. On tour, let's see how the Green Corn Project extends a helping hand to nourish a community.
Thanks to Green Corn Project, bushels of nutritious homegrown food have made it to the table since 1998, when they first dug in to help people find self-reliance in organic harvests from the soil. Their 10th anniversary celebrated 130 gardens all over town, built by volunteers who wanted to learn how to garden while helping others.
A new garden usually takes about 4 hours to build. We'll come out, we'll build it, we'll plant all the seeds, we'll bring the compost, we'll bring the seedlings, and then after that, it's really up to you. We put in new gardens every season, and then we go back and refurbish older gardens, and eventually gardeners become what we call self-reliant, where either we just provide compost seeds and starts to them, or they may be even beyond that point where they're just doing it all on their own.
At Travis Heights Elementary, teacher Brian Tyner applies science and math in the garden planted and tended by his 4th grade bilingual students.
Measuring and estimation are a big part of 4th grade curriculum.
This one's 76.
What they've been doing is taking, periodic measurements of the plants in centimeters, and we'll take that information, compile it, and create a line graph. So that's a real-world application that we can take out of the gardening project and do for math.
Along with nurturing their plants to new heights, the children measure their success in many ways.
We walk by the garden every day coming in from recess, and you start to see the kids' faces light up and get excited when they see the red tomatoes, like, oh my gosh, and I think it's just those aha moments that the kids get when they realize, oh, we've taken this from seed to fruit. I think that they're just learning an enjoyment for gardening, learning about life cycles and getting to see these things with their own eyes.
It's really great to see those kids get really excited about it. I had one little kid tell me he was going to be the jalapeno man, the flaming jalapeno man, and he was going to grow jalapenos at his house. It was so precious.
Thanks to their school garden, some of the kids want to try it at home. Green Corn's ready to dig in for this homework project the whole family can share.
It's not so much about feeding the kids, obviously. It's about education. It's about teaching them about where their food comes from and what is in season. How come there's tomatoes all year long at the grocery store, but in this garden we have to wait until June?
Green Corn also responds to veteran gardeners who need a helping hand.
My husband and I started gardening in the early 80s. We were inspired by Robert Rodell's organic gardening. It's important to have fresh organic food. The secret of a good garden is having good soil, living soil. Stan made most of the things out here. He says, well, you've done the garden, but he did all the work, so I just get to put the icing on the cake. The barrels are a form of raised gardening, and with my husband and I, disabilities that we have, it just makes it easier to not be stooping and bending over.
They were doing fine until they needed a bigger garden like they once tended.
I was diagnosed in 2003 with carcinoid cancer, and it affects my ability to absorb food. And having fresh food is every bite that I eat needs to count, and so it's real helpful to have good food, quality food, and fresh food is the best. A friend of mine told me about green corn. I had given up on being able to do a vegetable garden because neither Stan or I could dig a garden anymore. And when I talked to her and she told me about green corn, and I got in touch with them, and they were so nice, and they sent over the day we agreed on, they brought these beautiful young people to work in the garden, and they dug, and the birds were singing, and the children were laughing and working, and it was just like flowers in my garden. They were just delightful. And those are memories I'll always have.
To celebrate their 10th anniversary, Green Corn applied to the Trail Foundation's annual auction for a Lady Bird Johnson Adopt-A-Garden.
One of the issues is that our gardens are on private property. They're on people's backyards or they're at schools, and if someone's interested in really seeing what we do, we can't just say, here, go to the east side and go to this neighborhood and go to this person's backyard. So this is a way for people to really see how you can garden in a small space. You can garden in not really the greatest of conditions. I mean, we haul water from the river. There's no irrigation here. People are like, I would have never thought that you could even put vegetables next to, there's ornamentals and there's other plants here. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, I wouldn't really thought you could mix the two, but this actually looks pretty good. A lot of people come, including myself, and realize this bed is actually doing better than our beds at home. I don't know what it is, the light, the temperature, all the love it gets, people running by, but it's doing great. We found there's a lot of people that have gotten really attached to this garden. Every time I come up, there's people here, they're like, oh, I've been waiting to see if the tomatoes are ripen, or there was a bad storm and they were worried that something had happened to them. And so we ended up having a conversation about gardening and how they might be able to garden in their small space.
Suzanne was new to gardening when she first volunteered with Green Corn, so she knows what it's like for the gardeners she helps get started.
I can tell them, don't worry, before I started doing this, I killed every plant within a 10-foot radius. I think it calms them down a little bit that you don't really have to be a master gardener to grow vegetables successfully. I've since become a master gardener, which is kind of funny that, 3 years ago I killed all the plants and now I'm a master gardener, but it just goes to show that once you start gardening, you can't stop.
I've learned a lot about gardening because I feel like I have 130 gardens all over town, and every one of them is different, and some of our gardeners know way more about gardening than I do, for sure, and it's great to be able to learn things from them. If you want a mentor, we try to match up gardeners with mentors, and that's really a big part of our program that we're trying to strengthen. So we're always looking for volunteers who are interested in mentoring our gardeners, which is a really fun way to meet people like Joan, who are just lights.
There's a lot of life lessons in gardening. You learn as much from your failures as you do your successes. Like us, it's a work in progress.
It's so great to see people reconnecting with nature through the Green Corn Project. Right now we're going to be talking about wildlife in the garden and providing water, food, and shelter for our feathered and furry friends out there. I'm joined by one of our favorite guests on the program, Charles Stevens from Wild Birds Unlimited. Welcome back to Central Texas Gardener.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be back.
It's always fun to have this conversation with you. One of my favorite subjects, really. I think it's my favorite thing about the garden is the visitors. And this has been a tough year for the visitors.
It has been. This drought has been quite remarkable, going on a year plus now, and we're finding stresses in our wild places here, and there are things that people can do in their own spaces that can help create or alleviate that pressure that's been put on our wildlife, birds in general, and everybody else that's furry and whatnot.
Right. Well, I know that you're actually working with the city of Austin, collaborating with a number of groups that are really trying to educate people about this.
Indirectly, we do. Yeah, we provide funding as part of our gross revenue to a nonprofit organization, National Wildlife Federation, that has a program that's collaborative with the city that's called Wildlife Austin, and their whole effort is to go out to people's communities and places and try to get education to the people out there that they can recreate not just nativescape but wildscapes through the proper planting and implementation of things like water features, feeders, and shelters, of course.
Right. Well, let's talk about some of the things that you brought along. It's always fun to see this stuff because there's a beautiful decorative element to it, as well as the function of really helping out our feathered friends here. And water, the thing that I've noticed most in the garden is if you provide water, the wildlife will show up. And bird baths is simplest first step. And you have brought a couple of different varieties here.
Yeah, like this decorative one up here, it's a mosaic inlaid, but it can be decorative but yet have full function. The grout in that one right there offers something for the birds in general to grab onto and feel safe and secure. The other thing too is the gradual slope of that bath there. Having a bath that's too deep won't become a bird bath in function. It'll just be a bird trough.
Right.
So it's best to have, if you do have that deep bath, place rocks or something like that that you might have around the landscape to recreate that if you have that.
Absolutely. That's what I do in my own garden. I have a ceramic bowl, but you put rocks in, and it gets heavy use during the summertime, especially.
And it's important that you do rotate that. If you have it just standing like that, that you rotate the water out, every 3 to 5 days. So
yes.
A, you don't get mosquitoes, but B, it's fresh supply.
It's absolutely
as
right.
opposed to
now, right next, I'm always on the lookout for handsome bird bath. I think this one really fits the bill. This is very classical looking. It's actually a cast concrete, right?
It is, but it's made to have this faux finish, but it's baked on and stained, never fades or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it does give that carved out look.
Looks like lava stone or something like that.
The basalt
absolutely beautiful. And very functional as well as decorative in that the rough sides give the birds plenty of easy footing.
Exactly, and the slope as well too. It doesn't. It offers. There's always going to be a level never deeper than 1/4 inch in a bath like that.
Right.
The other thing too that you can also, if you don't have the time or inclination to go out and refill it every so often, put in just a dripper, just a simple little dripper that
that's
simply.
what we have here.
Yeah,
it just hooks on like this.
And you put it right into a spigot source, and in no time you can calibrate it to where it just barely drips. Maybe a gallon every 4 hours. So
right.
Even in the heat of the summer, nothing will ever flow, and it'll be used to.
Oh yes,
no end, so it's used.
And the dripping, just the slight movement of the water attracts more wildlife, and it really makes a big difference.
Moving water is by far the biggest attraction to all wildlife, regardless.
Well, we all love hummingbirds and attracting hummingbirds to the yard, but you brought something that's a hummingbird feeder, but with a twist.
Well, it's not. It's sold as a hummingbird feeder, but it's sold as a planter. But I've always encouraged people to plant annuals like pintas and things that grow prolifically.
Right.
But you can plant them in unique ways. This is a planter here that's not traditional. You can start it out like a traditional pot, flip it over, and your pinta will then grow upside down, but yet you can hang it, suspend it from wherever you so please. But you can then have something that's beautiful to look at, but also providing in a hands-off way. If you can't go in there and change that hummingbird feeder.
Exactly.
Just plant it.
Right, and I like the notion of letting the hummingbirds have the natural food, that the nectar from the plants themselves, and so having plants that attract them, but with this beautiful decorative touch of having the planter hanging with your birdhouses or feeders, that's a great way to go.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that you sell that I really love, because it's proved to be 99.99% squirrel proof. I did have one squirrel who seemed somehow to fly, but you sell these trees that can be placed out in the garden, and you can put baffles on them to prevent squirrels or raccoons and things getting on. And if you don't have a place that's secure from the house or a tree to hang them from, this is a great way to go, and the birds love them.
Exactly. I mean, it's like a human erector set that we say you can kind of create your own, what you want specifically. This just happens to display how something can be uniquely situated and then an island effect. Right. You don't have to have one thing over here, one thing over there. It can all be grouped together.
Right, and it puts on quite a show when you have the goldfinches and the chickadees and the titmice and the blue jays and everybody showing up. So that's great.
The whole gamut.
Now, at the top here, we have a suet feeder, which is basically just a plastic pole with holes carved through it.
Yeah, and it's a new thing that's come out recently. It's actually made of recycled milk jugs, so it's a good way to recycle some of what we have. But basically, it's made to put spreadable suets, like this bark butter that we have here. But you can also put in homemade suets or peanut butter or whatnot. But wrens, woodpeckers, and some of the winter warblers, and even the spring warblers that move through.
And you have a traditional suet cage right below that.
Right. That's like people who use the old traditional suet blocks. It's a preformed, mold basically that you just put in there. And around here, you can use it year round.
Yeah, and it attracts all different kinds of birds. You mentioned this. This is like a suet butter.
It's basically it's like peanuts, peanut butter and lard and cornmeal, and it's formulated in a way that it's not going to run and get melted on you if it's above 105 degrees. But basically, it allows you to put it on something like that feeder, or if you have an old limb or something like that, you can just drill out some holes, slab
Perfect.
it on there and set it up and watch the the light go away.
Well, you also brought a weighted feeder, or it's a silver feeder, and this is designed to prevent birds like doves from dominating.
Right. This is one of our best sellers, basically, for not only squirrels, but the larger birds that we have, which seem to be, white-winged doves are now considered flying hogs because they just consume so much.
Right.
But that feeder in its design gives people the ability to place that feeder where they want it. They didn't have to be situated with a baffle or this far away from a wall or somewhere where a squirrel can get. So
well, the doves fly on there and they weigh it down and they can't get at the food. Very simple.
You can calibrate the spring and dictate who gets on it.
Right. Now, my favorite visitors are the finches. I absolutely love the lesser goldfinches, which we have year-round, and then during the wintertime, the American goldfinches. And the yellow feeder in the back here is specifically designed for them.
Correct. It's one of the best ways to bring a little bit of color and see the transition of color from winter's gray. As you get closer to spring, the American goldfinches transform themselves through the process of feeding. But thistle feeders, provide winter pleasure for everyone. So it's a great complement to the rest of the
And the yellow color helps attract the birds in.
True, that yellow, that's right. Cornell did a study and they showed, Grandpa was right when he said tie an old yellow ribbon around the old finch feeder. And so now all the finch feeders are yellow now.
Right.
So.
Well, one of the things that you can add to your finch feeder or any of these to protect them from the elements or from squirrels or what have you is an umbrella or shade or baffle device. And I like to use this with my thistle feeders because it protects them from the rain, keeps the seed fresher.
Especially like feeders like that one that's so exposed. Baffles like that, this one is a little decorative and adds a little feature to the landscape.
Right.
Does serve that function well.
And in addition, providing shelter, and we have a large group of birdhouses over here. One of the things that we have is a birdhouse on a pole, and this is again a great way for something like this, which is a bluebird house, if you have the space for it, and you could put a baffle on, again, protect them from predators.
Exactly. One central feature to that house there is the entrance to that house. It's got a little spacer that gives you about an inch or so to give predators no chance of getting to the babies. So
there you go.
Set up in the right location, that's great.
Okay, well, again, shelter, food, water, those are the essentials. And Charles, again, it's always a pleasure to have you on. These make great holiday gifts and gifts for the wildlife as well.
Thank you, Tom, for having me. It's been a pleasure again.
Okay, well, take care. And coming up next is our buddy, Skip Richter.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. Fall is leaf season, and when leaves fall, we begin to think about using them in compost. Compost is that rich, earthy smelling material that is absolute garden gold, or black gold, if you will, for the garden. It builds the soil by helping sand hold water and nutrients. It helps the clay stay loose and drain better. It releases nutrients. It really supercharges the microbes in the soil, causing them to proliferate and produce a lot more of the nutrient material from the compost that your plants need. So it's a good thing to have. Well, we get a question often this time of year about how do I build a compost pile? Well, there's a number of ways to do it. But first of all, I want to say if you read things that talk about making compost in 3 weeks or it has to be so many degrees temperature, you can go through those high-speed composting attempts and you can stick thermometers in it and measure it. But just remember, you're not going to fail at composting. Eventually, everything is going to rot back into the soil. So even if it takes a long time, that's still okay. So don't be intimidated by it. The secret to it is to keep the organic matter moist so that it can decompose. You want a mix of things. Things like leaves and grass clippings can be put together into compost. Plants that were in the garden growing that are now spent and gone can be chopped up and put into compost. You can mow over them with a lawnmower and then put them in the pile. Food scraps can also go into compost, especially vegetable scraps, coffee filters, tea bags. You want to avoid oil, meat products because they tend to draw varmints to the compost pile. Also, we like to stay away from pet droppings. If you've got those types of things, you can bury them in the ground. Remember how the Native Americans taught the Pilgrims to put a fish in the hole and then plant a seed on top. You can do that same sort of thing. We call that compost holing. But in the compost pile, we want to avoid attracting rats or anything like that to it. So we stay just with vegetable trimmings and the leaves and the grass clippings. You want to make sure and keep the pile moist, and also turn it occasionally if you want it to speed up. If you just leave it unturned, it will compost just a lot slower over time. There's no problem using diseased plant materials. Most of that will die in the composting process. And also keep in mind that one particular plant disease doesn't typically affect another plant. So if you have leaf spots on those tree leaves, it's not going to cause the tomatoes or flowers in your garden to get a fungal leaf spot infection. It just doesn't work that way. So just compost anything you can get your hands on, because we can't get enough of that good garden gold for the soil. This week's featured plant is cyclamen. Cyclamen are a great cool season plant. They're one of the unique plants that can be used indoors or out. We often buy them for decorating inside the house. You want to, if you have an indoor cyclamen, move it outside during the day as much as you can to get a lot of light. That'll keep it from stretching and starting to kind of fall apart as it gets floppy on you. By moving it outside and then bringing it back in, it stays nice and tight and looks good for a long time. It likes those cooler temperatures too outside. If you want to plant one in the garden, choose a spot that's bright, shady. Underneath a live oak tree, for example, is a good place for a cyclamen. Some place where it doesn't get direct sunlight, but where it has good brightness, and it'll do quite well. Keep it moist, but make sure it has good drainage, because soggy conditions aren't okay. Now, the plant's cold hardy down to the mid-20s, but if it drops below freezing, you may get a little bit of bloom damage, but they can survive down to about the mid-20s and do quite well. So they're a good way to decorate a pot or a container by a front door. Outside in the garden, it's time to prepare soil for spring. If you've got garden areas that you're not growing anything in now, mix some leaves into the soil, mix some compost into the soil, and put a leaf covering over the surface to get that soil ready for spring. Plant those cool season plants like viola and pansies and others. Now's a good time to have good color on through the season. For more information or to find out how to contact your local county extension office, visit klru.org/CTG.
Thanks, Skip. Now let's check in with Trisha Shirey for Backyard Basics.
There are lots of members of the allium family that are really worth growing. Many of them are perennial in our area and give us year-round color and flavor for our kitchens. One of my favorites is the onion chives, which make a beautiful border plant. It likes a rich soil and consistent moisture, so not exactly a drought-tolerant plant, and it can tolerate a little bit of filtered light if you don't have a real sunny garden. It puts on beautiful flowers in the spring, which are also edible. A couple of other perennial alliums are the society garlic. Now you'll find the variegated society garlic with a beautiful variegated leaf, and also the green society garlic. Both of these have beautiful purple flowers which are edible and give a nice touch of garlic flavor to egg salad or your green salads, and are just beautiful in the landscape. And because they have such a strong onion flavor, deer don't tend to like them, so they're a great addition to a garden that has deer issues. And then there's the garlic chives. Now these are similar in flavor to the onion chives, although more garlicky, and they have a flat green leaf as opposed to the round leaf, so you'll be able to tell them apart. They're also much larger than the onion chives, and they produce a white flower that's really beautiful, but not a great cut flower because it does make the house smell like garlic when you cut it. But do make sure you keep the flowers cut off of your garlic chives because they produce a lot of seeds and you'll have the seedlings coming up everywhere. Two of my favorites, though, that are particularly for the fall season are the multiplying onions and leeks. Now, green onions are great to grow all winter, but they're kind of tedious to plant. You have to plant them every year. But if you get these multiplying onions, they grow in clumps. And so you'll start out by planting just a single bulb when you buy them, or sometimes you can find the bulbs the green onions already started, and you put them together and they'll grow in a clump like this, and you'll pull those out of the ground, and I'll just pull out some of the larger onions and use those in the kitchen, just kind of pull those away, and then divide the clump and plant the rest of the clump back in the garden. And in fact, this clump I'd probably divide into 3 or 4 different clumps and then plant that back in the garden. They'll just keep multiplying and producing more onions. You can find them in white, red, or yellow onion size, but they don't ever produce big mature onions. They just stay the thin, narrow green onions that are so nice to cook with. Another plant that's really great to grow in the fall is the leek, and these are wonderful for soups and sauces and stir fries, and they're very simple to grow. Now, the leek seedlings look like little leaves of grass, and they're typically grown in deep trenches, and the soil is pulled around the leeks as they grow. And you can grow them that way, but I tend to just plant the leeks in my perennial beds. And what will happen with the leeks and the multiplying onions is they go dormant in the hot weather. As soon as it starts to cool up and often we get more rains in fall, then those bulbs magically reappear. So you want to make sure that you're not disturbing them through the summer months as they've gone dormant. The leeks will grow in large clumps like this. So I take this clump, just dig it out of the ground. You want to use a spade because they do grow rather deep. And I'll take out the larger leeks and then plant these small leeks back in the garden. And plant them rather deep. And they do like a very rich soil with lots of nutrients. Now I do plant my leeks around the roses. The leeks do have, all members of the allium family have sulfur compounds in them, so that might have a fungicidal effect. Another way to multiply the number of leeks that you have, now normally we would cut the root off of the leek like this, but if you actually leave a little bit more of the white fleshy tissue on the root and cut that off, you can plant that in the garden and another plant will come from it. You can also buy them at the grocery store if they have nice healthy white roots, and again leave a little bit more of that white tissue, plant that, and you'll get a new leek from those roots. But you'll take the leek and cut off most of the green leaves and just use the white part of the leek. And it's really delicious to use in your kitchen. You'll really enjoy having fresh leeks all winter long in your garden.
Thanks, Trisha. For more tips and our weekly blog, check out klru.org/CTG. Until next time, I'll see you in the garden. Visit klru.org/CTG to learn more about today's program, upcoming events, and to sign up for our electronic newsletter. Check out John's how-to tips and visit Trisha's Corner for ideas inside and out. Get growing at klru.org/CTG.